Hey friends. Okay, a lot going on here in this brain of Robin's. Some of the circuits are becoming heavily loaded. We'll see how this goes. But I have continued reading the book that I've been talking to you about for like a week and a half now. It's called Erzählende Affen. It's a German book about narratives as the foundation of human meaning. And they got into a segment yesterday when I was listening, or the day before, I think it was yesterday, where they were talking about, because the whole sort of one of the outgoing premises of this entire book is that we make meaning through narrative. One of the most fundamental and almost hardwired forms of narrative that we both seek in the information, in the stories that we see around us, and that we project onto our circumstances and our reality. One of the primary narrative forms is the form of the hero's journey, as mapped by Campbell, as mapped by any number of other scholars who've studied story structure. And what the authors did in yesterday's chapter was to point out that the hero's journey, as mapped by Campbell, and as we historically generally describe it, that hero's journey is in many ways what we might call a masculine hero's journey. It involves an individualistic going out, reaching out, and probing into the dark, unknown, scary forces, enemies, etc. And through individual acts of heroism and strength, overcoming and then emerging victorious. And what they were pointing out is that there's a more what we might call feminine form of narrative that still involves human beings facing massive challenges and overcoming, but that does not emphasize the individualistic role in that struggle or in that victory. It emphasizes the coming together of multiple people. Sometimes it's a small group of people, sometimes it's a whole community of people. In other words, there is that what might be described as the more feminine impulse to embrace, include, and create a community, create a gathered strength. And there are stories like that, obviously, and there are plenty of examples of that kind of heroism. They're just not what we traditionally would label our hero's journey. And virtually all the stories that Campbell mapped and the story structure, the story arc that he uncovered and sort of decoded from these thousands and thousands and thousands of myths that he analyzed, was not that. It was the much more masculine emphasis on the individual kind of thing. So what they were saying is, first of all, that's just interesting to note that and it's important to emphasize that a masculine hero's journey and a feminine hero's journey are types of journeys. They are not types of heroes. A masculine person, they gave a great example of, for example, Wonder Woman, one of the kind of like iconic female heroine. If you look at the story, especially the most recent film or two of hers, of Wonder Woman's, played by Gal Gadot, I think is her name. The hero's journey in those stories is completely individualistic. So she's going on a masculine hero's journey. She just happens to be a feminine hero. Harry Potter, they point out, goes on a journey where it's about creating knitting a friendship, knitting a collective, and prevailing together. So Harry Potter, a masculine hero, goes on a more what they have called a kind of feminine hero's journey. So that's an important thing to just kind of understand. Okay, we're not talking about masculine versus feminine individuals or heroes or even groups. We're talking about types of journey and types of story structure, and ultimately types of meaning making for how we overcome problems. That's kind of point one. Point two is that if we look at some of the big issues that face us as a planet right now, many of them are problems that cannot be solved by individual heroes. What individual hero is going to go out and solve climate change? Right? What individual hero is going to go out and solve political hyperpolarization or food shortages across the globe? Right? Now, that doesn't mean there isn't room for stories within any of these domains where there really are individualistic heroes. Like, for example, Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish woman who has been she's like the literal poster child for climate change awareness now. She has made herself a lightning rod of an entire generation's awareness of this issue. And she goes way beyond her own generation. I mean, I don't even know what you'd call her. She's probably Gen Z technically, but she's reverberating across the entire planet and across all ages. That is in some ways that you could if you were going to make a movie out of that, you could make a pretty cool individualistic hero's journey there. But the fact is, the issue is not one that an individual hero is going to solve, and one of the things that these authors were saying is that's what makes these problems so intractable. One of the things that makes them so hard for us to wrap our heads around is that we don't habitually look for that kind of narrative in our meaning making. You know, they pointed out in the 70s and 80s, the oil industry very shrewdly lobbied and propagandized against the idea that there was anything wrong with climate policy, and tried to put the emphasis for the climate issue onto individuals, because in other words, telling individuals you should not drive as much, you should save water, you should not use CFCs because they put holes in the ozone, etc., right? The focus on individual action. Meanwhile, which it's not to say that there's nothing that individuals can be doing to combat climate change. Of course there is. But individual action, especially if it's siloed and separate from policy, from the political arena where the policy gets made, that has very predictable and very well understood outcomes, then putting the emphasis on the individual is total distraction. It's a total spin zone. It's just trying to point our attention on something that we will resonate with because we like these stories of individual heroism, and it makes sense to us that our individual transformation, our individual action means something. Especially in America, we feel that way very strongly. Other cultures are conditioned a little bit differently as far as like the relationship between individual and collective values and action, but Certainly in America, you tell an individual, this is about you and what you can do, what you alone can do to make this problem better. And we go, yes, now I understand myself. I have meaning. My own actions have meaning. My choices have meaning. I'm going to go take the best action that I know how to do. But we might not. And this is also, interestingly, an overlap between what Ibram Kendi says about racism and racial disparities, the persistence of racial disparities in policy. One of his things was, it's all well and good to evolve our perspective and to persuade people to think differently about race. But what makes a difference to the lives of large groups of people and what has a measurable, move the needle impact on racial disparity is policy, which is collective action. Policy might be made by individual policymakers, but it is an enshrinement of collective values, and it's a codification of collective action. It's how we as a society will conduct ourselves. So I just found this fascinating, that this realization that we are so programmed to interpret the world through the lens of the individual hero's journey, and to put ourselves in that, a large part of how we make meaning and why we care about the world, why we care about our own life, is framed in terms of how do the actions that I take make a difference, and how can I prevail in this, in whatever scenario we find ourselves in, versus not the opposite approach, but an approach that is collective, where we invest our energy and where we direct our attention is into relationships, into social fabric, into collective mobilization that is ultimately the only viable way to deal with some of the massive issues that we're facing. Man, if that's not some food for thought as far as examining our conditioning and looking at the types of filters, the types of presuppositions and assumptions that we come to the world with, and a helpful sort of provocation to understand our own meaning making, I don't know what is. That was massive when that penny dropped yesterday or whenever it was. I was like, wow. Because then you look at the self-help industry. The self-help industry is oftentimes marketed to people who are trying to it's like we sense that there's something wrong. We don't quite fit into the society. Something feels off, or we do, but we're not satisfied, and lasting satisfaction seems to elude us. The self-help industry very, very often is about how you can help yourself. Self-help. It's the onus on the individual to transform and transcend within a dysfunctional society. Well, again, I am all about self-help and actions that we can take as individuals to transcend, to transform. Yay, 2 thumbs up. But we should not ignore that there's another level of action. There's another level of consciousness. There's another kind of relationship. And there's another approach to problems. There's another form of heroism that is actually inherently inclusive. It's based on networking and inclusion. And it's the only way to leverage the kind of force that is required to change some of the issues that we have as a globe. So, yeah, big for me. If you can't tell, I'm still kind of buzzing from it. So, thought I'd share that. That's what I had today on this lovely Monday morning. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate you. Have a great day. All the love in the world. I'll see you tomorrow.